Plans, specs, and estimates, PS&E. This is what I refer to as the finish line for those of us in project delivery. It's not truly the finish line. There's still work up to bid. They're supporting the project through construction. But for the most part, we're there and we've developed that final set of contract documents that we're going to advertise. And for the most part, our work here is done in project delivery. In the past, in our region, there'd be some root beer floats. Before that, pitchers of beer down after hours, of course, on your own time, and all that. But it's that major milestone that we've accomplished a lot of work. We've heard from the beginning, from initiation, from Mike Darling, everything that leads into that. We talked about DAP, getting that benchmark set. This is the project going forward. The check-in points along, the preliminary and the advanced and the final plans. And this is where we put, rubber to the road and put it on the streets for the contractors to bid. At the same time, we're also satisfying or documenting that we've satisfied a number of our legal requirements that we have around project delivery, some of our stewardship requirements. We have the federal highway. And so this is where we collect up all that information that we've done and, put it together in a package, send it to OPL, and put it out on the streets. Oh, I'm not Carol Carr, right? So what is PS&E? How many people, a relatively new crew here, how many people have sent a project through PS&E? Okay, so we got folks that are working towards that. So our goal is to talk about PS&E, what goes into it. We're going to get into the weeds a little bit. We're going to go through the PS&E checklist and go through the deliverables that we have for that so we can talk about what that means. Because I know when I first started, I'd see this checklist, and somebody goes, "What's Buy America?" I'm like, just mark no, it's okay. What's Taro? Yeah, just mark it, it's good. And you didn't really know what was behind all that. And after a few years, kind of figured out what that's about. But knowing what goes into that checklist as a technical discipline, it'll help the project leader and help the project move forward by having the right deliverables done. And then we'll talk about the timeline of PS&E. So this is your PS&E checklist. This is what goes down. Back in the day we used to mail them, but now it's a set of electrons and a set that goes down and gets opened up. But there's a few key things on here that I want to point out. Ultimately, we're wanting to get to this point here where we say all project requirements and deliverables have been delivered. And if we don't, that's a hole in our PS&E package that we have to get exceptions for. And we'll talk about a PDO2 exception letter, but if we're missing any of these items, we have to get concurrence from deputy director down, or a highway administrator down, in order to move forward with that project because we've missed something. And if we go down that path, we definitely have to have a plan for how we're going to resolve it before it goes to advertising. And that requires a lot of coordination between a number of units to make sure that we're all okay with that and that risk is enough that we can accept it. And there's some certain items that you will not get a PDO2 exception for, namely environmental. If you don't have your environmental in place, don't even waste the time writing the letter because it's going to be dead on arrival. For me as an area manager, my role in the checklist is I've got the project leaders making sure that they've got everything coming together. My counterpart in the tech center, tech center managers making sure technical review's been done, all the deliverables are there. But my part is the funding. I want to make sure that our estimated construction amount is less than what we have available budgeted. So that gives area managers a little bit of reputation of being all about the bottom line dollar-wise, and it's probably true. We want to make sure that we've got the budget in place to be able to advertise and award this project. If we don't have the money in place, it's too late at this point to try to add money to the project. You need to have your STIP amendments worked and in process, because it takes time to get a STIP amendment done, and we have to be able to have the resources available to go ahead and award that. So That's the first thing I look at on the project. And honestly, that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. By the time you get to PS&E, you should know what your project's going to cost and have time to be able to adjust that. And that's why we talked so much about having everything locked in at DAP. You know, you have a pretty good idea what your project's going to look like, and then from there, that gives you the time to adjust the dollars, shift between phases, or go ahead and bring new resources into the project so that by the time you get to PS&E, you have the money available to be able to award the project. Okay, so that's the cover letter to the Office of Project Letting saying that everything is complete. If it's not, like I said, we go to the exception process. So in the checklist, these are the major items. You know, first off, we have our final design, our final plans ready to go. So quick question for everybody. After you get done with the region review, what set of plans has to get an additional set of signatures before it can be submitted to OPL? Any traffic people in the room? Yep, your traffic devices. They need to go to the state traffic engineer and get approval for that. So, if you're scrambling, you're counting the minutes before it's got to go out, and you got your plans, getting ready to be delivered. If you're in traffic, you need to think about that. Or if you've got traffic plans on your project, or structures, you need to get that approval a little bit earlier. So your deadline just a little bit shorter than everybody else's to get that done, and you need to account for that. Final bridge plans, we've got a separate line item for the final bridge plans. We have the completed environmental documents. So this is where you're going to either have the programmatic categorical exclusion. That's the one we can usually know pretty early in the project that we're going to be at. Or we've gotten our categorical exclusion. We've gotten the signatures from Federal Highway. Everybody's comfortable that we've satisfied all of the environmental requirements to be able to deliver the project. The next one is, of course, our project special provisions. Easy enough. But we also have the professional record certification for the approval of the special provisions that they've developed, that they're standing behind that. There's the signed special provision integrity certification. And that's making sure that if we've modified any special provisions or any specifications, that the expert in Salem has approved that and they bought off on that. Because we have to make sure that our specifications are consistent with our DOJ exemption. Who's had the joy of doing A&E contracts, putting together an architectural engineering contract? Those all end up going to DOJ, anything over $150,000. And that adds a lot of time to your project. With our construction contracts, we have a DOJ exemption. So that means that if we fall within the parameters, they build us a little box. If we stay in that box, we're okay to move forward without additional DOJ review. And this certification to make sure that our special provisions have been approved helps us keep that exemption because we don't want to step off the path and experience the additional DOJ review that could come from this down the road. And that makes us more efficient in our delivery of the projects with that exemption. So that's why it's a big deal. So if you're a designer and you're like, I'm just going to change the specification, and because it makes it a better project, it probably does make it a better project, but we have to make sure we get that approval up front before it goes to OPL and your PS&E delivery. That one's a big one. That catches a lot of people. Then of course we have our DBE goals, disadvantaged business enterprise goals. Before we deliver a project, spec writer's going to engage the Office of Civil Rights. They're going to take a look at the project, look at the type of work that's available on the project, and the size of the project, the number of crafts on a project, and they're going to go, okay, this is a project that's got a lot of different disciplines. It's a big project. This will be a good opportunity to bring in some additional DBE requirements on a project to help build strength in that sector of the contracting community. Likewise, we have the OJT on the job training. They're going to look at the size of the project and assign a number of hours. So the contractor is going to be required to provide as part of the project, and then that'll make its way into the specifications. But those are the things that need to be done well before we get to PS&E. Of course, we have our PS&E estimate, and that's going to be in the estimator file format and posted in your set. We have the fuel and steel escalations. This is a kind of a risk management tool, because right now, if a contractor was to bid a project, I'd say like right now, we've got rising fuel prices. You know, for us to be able to hedge against, or to protect us against them bidding too much risk into the project by trying to bid a project today and projecting what the price of oil is going to look like, you know, in August or September. If we didn't take that risk on ourselves, and that's what we do with this escalation, is we take the risk on as an agency, they're going to bid it high, and we're going to pay for higher prices because of the uncertainty the contractors have. So what we do is we have these escalation clauses in the contract that kind of helps hold them a little bit harmless on some of the escalation prices that can occur in two projects, or two products that tend to be a little more volatile, which is the oil and the fuel and the steel. So we do that up front. The project risk assessment summary is kind of a funny name, but really what we're doing is we're setting the insurance goals for the project. And your project leader is going to be doing that through a worksheet that's based on a number of criteria that kind of develops some of the areas of risk that can indicate that we need to carry either a lower minimum level of insurance for liability to protect the state, or a higher level. So if you've got hazmat, dense urban areas with lots of intersections, high speeds, those are the things that are going to drive you to a higher insurance requirement. But we work that out ahead of time. And typically you should have that done by advanced plans. But they want to see that risk assessment at the time of delivery. The right-of-way certification, there isn't a project that goes through OPL without a right-of-way certification. So we have to decide one of three things on every single project. Did we acquire the right-of-way we need for the project, and is it all in hand? Were we able to build it without new additional right-of-way? Or three, which is the one we don't like to do, is we've started the process and we're going to have it done shortly, and we're going to hold it out. That's the one that's going to require some additional conversations. But every project that goes through a commission service contract has to have a right-of-way certification no matter what. And the same thing with the utility certification. You're going to certify whether you relocated a utility, whether there's a plan in place to do it, or whether it's already done. And I think you didn't have any conflicts. The Buy America waiver. Who knows what Buy America is? All right, there's a good number of hands. For whatever reason, Congress has put a lot of emphasis on making sure that we use nothing but American steel. I mean, they don't worry about American plywood for our signs. They don't worry about American aluminum, but they do worry about American steel. And so there's a very strict requirement. We have to use American steel on our products, in our projects, and it can come in a lot of different forms. I know I've only seen one Buy America waiver that our region has done. That was a project that Sean had. It was a experimental ultra high performance concrete that had steel fibers that could only be obtained from the Netherlands, and it was quite a process. How many months was that? A year, 12 months. So if you have unique features that are going to require you to use something other than American steel, you got to get started on that early. The guidance has changed on this over the years as interpretations come down, but by and large, if you've got any steel products, you got to make sure that it's American. Then the last thing, or I guess not, you got the mobility considerations checklist that has to be done. And then the very last thing is the signed PDO2 exception. So if you didn't have any of those items, A through Q, you're going to have a PDO2 exception. And that's a process by which the region manager needs to get together with the Office of Project Letting and the Highway Division Administrator and agree that the project can move forward. And it's in the form of a memo. Some of the typical ones that we'll see for an exception letter are going to be Sometimes you might have a follow-on contract for CA/CEI, the construction inspection, that you need to get an amendment together on a contract for a consultant firm to carry that forward. And those used to get missed in the past a little bit, and you had a little bit of time to catch that. It wasn't going to stop the project, but you needed to have it before we went to advertise. Others would be like a right-of-way holdout. You went through the right-of-way process, you made progress, things kind of stalled out. You weren't able to get a condemnation case filed and get possession of the project prior to PS&E, or the property prior to PS&E, but you were, based on your timing, because it's a very statutory process, if you do this on this date, you get it on that date. If you're on track to be able to get that delivered and have possession of it prior to advertising, that was another thing that was more common for a PDO2 exception. But some of the things you're not going to get an exception for, definitely, you're not going to get an exception for environmental. If you're missing any of your environmental or NEPA clearance, you're not going to be able to move forward on the project. So that's the checklist that goes in. So were there any questions about the items I talked about on that? Okay. So behind the scenes is the completeness checklist. The completeness checklist, there's like 4 pages of that. And these are the things that you don't necessarily send them in to Melissa and her crew, but you're going to have them in your file, so that way if anybody ever asks, you can show that you did these things. So the first one is the FHWA requirements. You know, we talked about this. Does the STIP match, the budget? Have you made those changes ahead of time? Does the current STIP, match the project description? Has Federal Highway approved the interchange modification request for additional interchanges to the interstate system? Now, working out in Region 5, we have not put a new interchange on there since the time I've started with ODOT, so I'm going to have to trust that's a Region 1 or 2 or item there.
I've never done one either.
Okay, Melissa hasn't done one either. Okay. The other one is your design exceptions. While you don't submit them, you need to have them on file. And really, design exceptions like we talked about with DAP, you need to start those early. They take time. I just recently had a local agency project. They made it all the way to PS&E, and they just submitted their design exceptions for ADA. They've never designed ADA before, so it was kind of a learning process. And as you can expect, it wasn't exactly a group of exceptions that sailed through the first time. It took some follow-up work, and it cost us a bid letting. Bridge design deviations, statements of technical review. Carol talked about that. 1R projects, if you're going to go into the 1R program, you need to make sure you got an approval for being in the 1R program. Do you guys know what I'm talking about when I say 1R? So you got 4R, which is full-on modernization, 3R, which is like heavy preservation, and then 1R. I don't know what happened to 2R. That's been like the big mystery since I started. But, but we jumped down to 1R, and that's just your simple mill and fill. You're going to grind out, or you're going to just do like a simple overlay. You're not going to address the safety features. You're just making it black. You're just paving it. So that's 1R. And that gives us some extra. It relaxes some of our safety standards for that, or safety requirements for that project, with the idea that whatever you're not doing on that project, you're banking that money up in another program to put more safety features together and put that out in a more efficient package instead of piecemealing safety features on a number of small paving jobs. LPIFs. Who's heard of LPIFs? That's the letter of public interest finding. And I know Melissa's going to get into that in a larger degree, so I won't beat that to death. She'll talk about what those are. But as a former project leader myself, the one thing I would ask of project teams is, from the day you start your project, think about what LPIFs or anticipated items, which is the next, or anticipated items on the next page, but those are the 2 things that people forget about. And so if you're a designer and you're looking for things that are going to be fairly unique on a project, or you need money set aside as an anticipated item, think about that early from the time you're starting the project and where you're going to want that, so that we don't lose that, because that takes an approval that needs to run through OPL to have in place by the time we get to PS&E. Bid reference documents. So who all here produces bid reference documents? Okay, those are your geotechnical reports, your hydraulic reports, Bid reference document can be a set of as-built for a structure that we're working on. If we reference the 3D files, I call that a bid reference document. Those are the things that we have out there that we post onto eBids that a contractor can take a look at when they're bidding the project to know a little bit more about the project, what kind of site conditions they're going to encounter. So they go out there to go shoot some rock and they hit some oversize and they want to come back and hit us for some change, site conditions. We can say, no, it was clearly identified, the geotech had it in the geotech report on this page. We warned you that this could produce oversize. And so then that's how we kind of make sure we get all that information out there for them to be able to bid the project with a full body of knowledge on that. I referenced the eBids document. You're either going to have 3D design, and if you do, you're going to post it to eBids. If you don't have 3D design, because not every project is suitable for 3D design. I mean, who's going to go model, a chip seal? So you're going to get a letter from the roadway manager saying, we concur, this is not a 3D project. You'll just put that in your file. Mandatory pre-bids. This isn't something we do very often, but if we've got a unique project, and I'm thinking, project where you're replacing one of the trundle gears on a lift bridge in Portland, pretty unique piece of work. You want to make sure that people fully understand what they're getting themselves into. Well, thank you. That's one of those deals like, folks, you need to come out here on site and see what you're getting yourself into and make sure you're qualified to bid this and that you understand this. So that's mandatory pre-bid, not very often. We talked about anticipated items. Anticipated items are things that the contractor does not bid on, but we know are going to be items we may potentially have on a project. So an example would be utility hookup. You're putting in a new signal. The contractor can't bid on the hookup charge for the local, PGE, connection charge, for them to hook up. But we need to have money in the project so that we can have some funds available to pay for that hookup charge, hookup for community, communication charges, railroad flagging. We have to pay the railroad. If anybody wants to have a retirement career, railroad flagging seems to be quite lucrative. It's hundreds of dollars a day. Those are the kinds of things that the contractor can't necessarily bid because it's not a competitive deal because it's controlled by an outside entity. But we need to have money in the contract for that, and that takes approval early on. The specification changes, we talked about that. The erosion and sediment control plans, have we gotten those? Did the statewide erosion control technical resource concur with that? And then we assign it as being a high, low, or medium, or no risk type project? Do we have a special pre-qualification? Sometimes if you've got a unique piece of work, I'm not sure if cathodic protection falls into that, but something that's fairly unique that you need to have somebody who's pre-qualified, we need to have that in place too, if that's going to be the case. Under certifications, are the railroad agreements in place? And has anybody here recently done a railroad agreement with Union Pacific? Yeah, it's not going to be, it's going to take some time. So if you know that you've got railroad agreements on your project, that you need to start early and make sure that we're engaged with the railroad and that we're going to give them what they need. And part of that starts with knowing what they require. So most railroads have a unique specification that we'll put into the contract. They'll have a clearance diagram. So if you're designing, it's good to know that, hey, this railroad requires this much lateral and this much, vertical clearance, for your work envelope. So if you've got containment or you're going to be doing work under a structure or a railroad, you need to be thinking about that up front. And so we need to have that documented in your files. Project leaders have to have their IGAs in place in your governmental agreements. That way, if there's any cost sharing, we've got all that worked out before the project goes to bid so that if there's some buyer's remorse afterwards, we want to hang this on the city of Salem, we can't do that to them and they can't do that to us. But also the biggest part of that from a maintenance standpoint is if we're putting something out there like a rapid flashing beacon, which everybody loves rapid flashing beacons, but someone has to pay for the power and the maintenance and all that. So you have to think that through and think about the legacy costs and issues and make sure it's documented so that the roles and responsibilities are laid out with those features. The next one here is the cooperative improvement agreements for utilities. So a lot of times when we're going through town, there's certain things that are reimbursable. If we hit the city's water system and they're there prior to us, that relocation cost or adjustment cost is reimbursable by the project. But we're going through there and they've got some extra features like, you know, this is an area of town that's going to develop and we'd sure like to have a few more stub outs because we don't want to tear up the road. That additional capacity that they're adding is something that they're responsible for. So we can still do it under the contract, we just have to capture that cost. So that's what a utility CIA is to pay for those enhancements or benefits that the local jurisdiction has added to the contract that wouldn't be reimbursable by federal highway. And again, the right-of-way certification, we talked about that. We're going to want to make sure under Area 5, do we have all personal service contracts in place? This is same type of thing. You know, maybe we've embedded a traffic engineer into the project from the consultant community. They've designed the plans, but there's also some professional of record, you know, carry-on responsibilities to, you know, take a look at submittals when they come in, look at change orders, you know, answer questions during project, make sure that they're available, you know, as that professional record during the life of the contract. So we want to make sure that their contract is in place and executed prior to going to bid. If you're adding stormwater facilities, one thing we didn't do in the past is do a good job of telling people how to operate and maintain them. So we'd build something and walk away from it. So in recent years, we've now got a requirement that if you're putting a stormwater facility in, we need to have an operation and maintenance manual that we can hand over to the maintenance crew so they know that, you know, for this area with amended soils, they don't sweeten up the shoulders and pull out, you know, the amended soils and reduce the function of that facility. And they understand the why and the how, you know, of this new feature that has been provided by the project. Taro, who's heard of Taro? Okay. This used to be a Region 5 thing. Everybody like, what's this Taro thing on the bottom of this list since I think it was about 1988. And it wasn't until just a few years ago that some of the other 9 recognized tribes in Oregon developed their own tribal employment right ordinance office. And basically that's like probably the easiest way to describe it. It's like a union hall for Native employees of the tribe. So you got folks who are members of the tribe. When we have projects in the area, there's a federal requirement to enter into Taro agreements if we're on reservation property. The state of Oregon has gone a little bit further and put a little bit of a buffer around the tribes to make a little bit bigger project area because there aren't too many projects that are fully contained within the reservation. But it provides employment opportunities for Native members of the tribe to be able to engage on the projects and sets hiring goals for them. And as a contractor comes in and they need additional employees, they can hire from there. So those need to be negotiated ahead of time. And with those simple 5 pages of checklists, you have PS&E. So any questions about checklists? I know I kind of breezed through them pretty quick. Any of the items on the checklist or the certification that jumped out that you had, or would you like to move over to Melissa's part? So after we've delivered this project, put a nice PS&E set together and emailed it off, then it ends up in Melissa's hands.
It does.
Okay.
All right. So the next piece, your PS&E timeline, this is about 7 weeks for your average project. It can be longer if you have a longer advertisement period. If you, based on the construction dollar amounts of your project, I believe it's over 5, 10, do you know what the $10 million, you have to go to a 4-week advertisement instead of a 3-week, and if it's over 15, you have to go to a 5-week advertisement. Those will add weeks to your timeline, but essentially, the typical 3-week ad is 7 weeks of PS&E time. In the project-wise, there's a workflow. You will find this on the Office of Project Letting website. It tells all the specific sets that have to be created for the PS&E submittal. I'm not going to go into great detail because there is a lot of it. I'm going to tell you where you can find this workflow, and you can download it and read through it at your leisure. Typically, I believe it's the project leader that puts these sets together once the rest of the technical disciplines have put all of their items into ProjectWise. So the Office of Project Letting, once you have all of those packages ready to go, or those sets, then you will send a note to the Office of Project Letting saying, hey, we're done, we made it. And that starts the PS&E process. So what the Office of Project Letting does is basically facilitate the processing of that submittal. We do a Q&A review of that project before it goes to the procurement office for advertisement and contract letting. So we make sure that all the federal requirements are done. We make sure that the plans and specs are consistent. And we also create the final engineer's estimate, and we write the advertisement. That is the website for the Office of Project Letting. On there, you will find links to all the standard boilerplate language. You will find links to the PS&E manual, which describes the PS&E submittal and the process thereafter in great detail. You will find a link to the LPIF manual, which will tell you how to write an LPIF and when you need to write an LPIF. Do you remember Ken talking about letters of public interest finding? You will also find templates for your PDO2 exception. You'll find templates for addendum letters. You'll find templates for letter of clarification letters. Anything that you have to, any form that you have to submit to PS&E, you'll find a template on this website. The Office of Project Letting typically doesn't get involved in your project until PS&E. However, your QA reviewers can get involved earlier if you request them to based on their available time. So I've been reviewing plans at advanced and final when my work schedule allows me to do that. So Ken alluded to this a little bit ago, but how many of or who can tell me who approves your special provision language, right? Any non-boilerplate language has to be approved by a certain number of people. Do you all know, or do any of you know who those people are?
I do, because I can see it.
You can see my notes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody? Correct, that's the first one, your technical discipline lead. And there is a link on a website somewhere, I don't have it in my presentation, with a list of who is the technical owner of each section of our specifications is. That person is different based on disciplines. They have to review and approve all of your special provision language. Who else? Anybody? Dan Anderson. Dan Anderson is the senior specification writer. Dan Anderson basically is the holder of that DOJ exception that Ken was talking about. So he is the single person at ODOT that can decide whether your change needs to go to DOJ for review or not. Any change to the 100 sections has to go to him for review, and any change to any measurement, payment, or warranty work has to go to him for review. Who's the last person? Anybody? There's one more.
Is it measurement and payment?
Measurement and payment. So if you make any changes to Section 80 or Section 90, it has to go to the construction claims engineer, Gene Wilburn, for approval. Those are the three people. Any boilerplate changes have to go to those people for review. This is supposed to happen before PS&E, right? You should be actually doing this before you send your spec language to the specification writer for inclusion in your, I don't know if it happens at advanced or final, or whenever that technical piece happens. So after PS&E is submitted, we have an internal checklist that we use to help us, and it reminds us of all the things that we have to look for. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but it's essentially a mirror image of the PS&E checklist with the details that we're looking for. So once we do this, once your package is accepted, it gets reviewed, like I said, for consistency with FHWA requirements. I'm going to look and make sure that your plans and your special provisions say the same thing, that you have bid items for all the work that's shown, that your special provisions have all been approved. And that all of the reviews that have been done on those, or all the reviews that are required and the concurrences are there. In addition to checking and making sure that all of the escalation clauses are included and all of those other things that Ken said have to be there, I'm going to look and make sure that they're all right. So here's an example of a project. This is the plan sheet that came to me, just like that. And it's not right. I had to send this back for revision. Any guesses about what was bad about this plan sheet? It's a title sheet. Well, it is, the picture that I have is cut off, so. But the pertinent data that you need to look for is there. So notice that there are work locations outside the BOP and the EOP, right? So BOP is your beginning of project, EOP is your end of project, and then it's showing work outside of that. That will get sent back to you. That does not conform with your contract plans development guide, right? There may be occasions where there is work outside what you're calling the BOP and the EOP. This is based on FHWA, especially for paving. If you have a full depth construction, that's what they want your BOP and your EOP to be. And then if you have swale work that's outside of there, essentially what you do is you show that under contract limits, right? So you have a BOP and an EOP, and then you show external contract limits to cover the rest of that work. All of the work that you're showing has to be within your contract limits. Does that make sense? So I will also scrutinize your standard drawing list to make sure that your standard drawings are all current and that they have the correct title, because these titles change and oftentimes they don't get updated on the index sheet. And make sure that all of the standard drawings that you reference in your plan actually show up on this sheet. You would be amazed to know how often it's wrong. So here's an example of a situation that I've had I've been with the Office of Project Letting now for about 8 months. I've had 3 different projects come in with this mistake on it. Can anyone pick it out? No one? Okay, I'm going to tell you what it is. Do you see where it says proposed permanent easement? Do you remember what Ken said about your right-of-way cert at PS&E and that we have to certify that we've purchased all the right-of-way that we need for the project before you submit PS&E? So there shouldn't be any proposed right-of-way on your PS&E plans, right? Maybe on your DAP plans before you've purchased right-of-way, but after that, that proposed must disappear. I will send back plan sheets that say proposed right-of-way on them every time. So, pipe data sheets. You guys, I've been with the agency for 21 years. I have never once reviewed a pipe data sheet that didn't have errors on it. There is a plethora of information on these things, and the contractors use them basically as a material list for their pipes. So if they're wrong, they're going to be ordering the incorrect materials. So make sure that you double check your pipe data sheets. Okay, here's another example of a project. Anybody pick out the problem with this plan sheet? You guys didn't know you were getting a quiz this afternoon, did you? Oh, you guys can't read it? Okay.
Well, the problem is it's unclear.
Yeah, it's unclear, which is why I send back lots of things. So because you can't read it, I'll tell you again. This is a traffic sheet. It has a TSR number on it. That's what that little supplemental block on the side of the signature block is. Similar to what you would find on a structure. It has that little supplemental with the structure number. But it also has a V number on it, right? One or the other, but not both. Yes?
Your clicker has a laser pointer.
Oh.
The little red arc there.
See that? That's that little supplemental block right there with the TSR number. Bridge plans have a similar supplemental block with structure numbers and drawing calculations. And your V number is at the top. So if you have a structure number or TSR number, no V number. Where do you find your instructions for how to do that? Come on. Contract Plans Development Guide, right? Okay. Letters of public interest finding. This is basically a written document that justifies why it's in the public's best interest for us to not follow the Code of Federal Regulation on procurement or a state statute. Anybody know when we have to do letters of public interest finding? Railroad flagging. That's an anticipated item. It's generally speaking, it's a pre-approved anticipated item, so you still have to fill out the template letter and check the box and get the signature, but you don't have to submit a one-page letter justifying why that's necessary. Sole source, yeah, sole source materials. Anything else? David? That is technically an LPIF, but doesn't fall into the category of LPIFs that I'm talking about right now, and is not one that you actually have to submit with PS&E. remarkably enough. Yeah.
Do you want the state to salvage materials like maintenance, the draft guardrail?
Salvaged materials. So federal regulations and state statutes specify that any material removed from our contracts becomes the property of the contractor. So if we want to salvage that, we have to write a letter justifying why it's in the public's best interest to do that. Anything else? Okay, there are actually quite a number of items. If you want to do a separate contract for, say, plant establishment or bird monitoring, you have to have a public interest finding for that. If you're going to do any force account work, if you're going to have any proprietary products, as we mentioned, this is due to synchronization, or if you have specialty stuff like historic districts where you want to have special light poles or something like that. You have to have a public interest finding for that. State supplied items. So if we're going to, salvage bridge beams off of one job and want to use them on the next job, you have to have an LPIF on the job you're salvaging from. You have to have an LPIF on the job that you're supplying them for. And then the last category, donations. So sometimes local agencies are allowed to make contributions to make up for their portion of the funding. Those require an LPIF. You can find all of this in the LPIF manual on the Office of Project Letting website. So Ken talked a little bit about Buy America, right? Buy America takes a really long time. So if you're at PS&E and you realize you need a Buy America waiver, you ain't gonna make it. If you're at final or advanced plans and you realize you need a Buy America waiver, you ain't gonna make it. It takes at least a year, and I think the current regulations actually take an act of Congress. The federal rule allows you to have 0.1% of the contract amount, or $2,500, whichever is greater, of foreign steel on your projects. Not a lot. Maybe couple of buckets of spare screws or bolts or something like that, but you won't get far. Buy America, in addition to your special fibers, comes into play a lot if you're working on any of our movable bridges, because the gears and the bearings are specially made, and our bridge pres folks really think that the Germans do a better job of building those. So, and they will not let you, FHWA will not participate in the project. So you can't just say, I'm going to buy those pieces of material with state funds on a federal aid job. It doesn't work like that. If there's federal money, you must meet all the federal requirements. So once I finish my review, I'm going to type up all my comments. Essentially, my job is to find all of the stuff that you guys miss, right? All of the mistakes or the inconsistencies. And then I write them all up in a comment log, and I send them back to the PL, who then will distribute them to the correct individuals for correction. So we can actually do corrections prior to advertisement with no additional letters or anything. So because we have a couple of weeks there where we're reviewing stuff, if you, especially with the advent of our digital plans and ProjectWise, it's become a lot easier to get plan changes done. You don't have to reprint Mylars and put them in the mail and get wet signatures. So we have a lot of opportunities to make corrections before advertisement. We do still have a number of projects that are coming in with Mylars, and those take some additional time because they have to go, those Mylar sets have to go to reprographics to have them scanned, so we don't have as much wiggle room with those. And I guess there's one last comment I have on those. If you make changes to your special provisions after you submit PS&E, you will have to re-sign your PORs, right? That's essentially your seal for the special provisions that you're carrying. So you'll have to re-sign those. Once I finish the comments, then you will get actually a grade on completeness based on the number of things that I find wrong with the project. Now, I can't tell you what happens with that grade. When I was a PL, it wasn't really anything that I ever looked for. So I don't know, there's no performance measure that's written currently around this grade, but just understand that it's there and it is just a percentage of completeness. So once the review is finished, then I send everything over to the Office of Project Letting. I'm sorry, the Office of Procurement, right? They actually do the advertising and the bid opening. We don't do that. If we need to make corrections after the advertisement, we can do letters of clarification. And these are basically just answering bidders' questions or adding additional bid reference documents, right? Letters of clarification do not change the contract documents. Your contract documents are your plans and your specifications. Your geotechnical report or your pavement design, those are bid reference documents, and they're only there to add additional information, and we can add those things after advertisement. Changes to the actual contract documents are done by addendum, right? So you have an addendum letter that you write, template on the OPL website. Technically, I think your spec writers are probably writing these most often. Is that right? Is that how you guys do those? I know Region 2 spec writers usually write the letters of addendum. We talked about the clarifications already. So that's PS&E. Any questions?
Does Buy America apply to utility betterment?
If there's federal reimbursement, yes.
Even for the betterment part though, that's funded by the utility itself?
If it's on a federal aid contract, yep.
Could you repeat that question again?
I was just asking if Buy America applies to utility betterment.
Okay, does Buy America apply to, what was it?
Utility betterments.
Utility?
Yeah.
Okay, and yes. All right. Anyone else? Sorry. It's harder when I'm way over here and the question is there. Danielle.
On the slide with the timeline, it said something about a 7-month lock-in. What is that?
So typically around advanced plans, your project will show up on what's called the 7-month lock-in report. So that's essentially 7 months prior to when PS&E is due. And that is essentially the region basically locking in that project, saying, yep, we're going to for sure deliver this, and we're going to measure performance from this point forward. So on-time delivery will be measured from your 7-month lock-in date for PS&E acceptance, not for bid let, for PS&E acceptance.
One question that does come up around PS&E that you know, you might hear people talk about, we need to get this project obligated. So we have a commitment to Federal Highway to spend so much money in a federal fiscal year. And there's a few ways to obligate the different phases of the contract. So, you know, when you're opening up your EA for the project, that's obligating your PE phase. You know, when the right-of-way descriptions are approved by OTC and you got your programming estimate in, and Federal Highway approves that, and you're able to proceed with the right-of-way, that's obligating that phase. Utility has a similar process. But when you obligate your construction phase is when it's sent to the Office of Project Letting and is accepted, and that's considered the date of obligation. So from there forward, we've met our commitment to Federal Highway to show that we've spent X amount of dollars. And the reason that's important is, you know, we have these performance measures, and one of the things that comes of delivering your projects on time and making your federal obligation is that the state of Oregon tends to be good at that. And so this last year, we got $50 million in reallocation money that other states didn't spend. But because we did a good job of getting our projects obligated, you know, in the manner that we said we were going to, you know, they give us additional money. So it's kind of cool. It gets distributed to other projects, and it's actually become something that the state of Oregon is counted on. I think we figure about a base of about 25 million in reallocation coming from other states, and you know, that's why it's important for us to hit those obligation dates, and that's just kind of the time frame of when that happens for the construction phase.
And that your obligation for your construction dollars doesn't happen exactly on the day that you submit your PS&E, but it's typically within the first week. So if you have, if you're trying to get your obligation done before the end of the federal fiscal year, which is at the end of September, if you have, you know, submit your PS&E, you know, in the first half of September, you can usually make that pretty easily.
Any
So
other questions? Go ahead, Ken.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, PS&E is kind of the culmination of what we do. It's where we collect up everything we've done. We've shown we've met our federal obligations, you know, per the stewardship agreement. You know, everybody's pretty much finished up their work. We've put that package together, put the best package we can to our construction crews so that they've got a good product to be able to administer a contract from. And, you know, that's just kind of the peak of the mountain. And it's like crossing the finish line. You know, it's a real good day to get that package sent off and accepted by OPL. So. If there's no other questions, I think we're done.
Melissa, Ken, thank you very
Thank you.
much.